This is being recorded. I've got the little sign up there saying recording. So I know that many people have registered. We had about 50 people register, but I know that a lot of people aren't actually able to make the call, which is fine, because you'll be able to have the recording. So if you are watching this or listening to this and it's being recorded, then please do, if you've got any questions, then please do email that over to me, and then I can ensure that the answers, both from myself and Phil and Stephen, can get out to you. If you're watching it now, then you'll notice on the right-hand side of your screen, there is the chat boxes. And so if you've got a question that immediately comes to you, then please do use that chat. And we will have a question and answer session towards the end of this webinar. So we're intending this to go on for an hour, which I'm very excited about. We'll have about 45 minutes of conversation, and then we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A. So firstly, before we get started and started with this conversation, I just want to say a little bit about where this came from. As a partner of Wiley, we're very aware that there's all sorts of wonderful things that are happening out there, and yet those stories really aren't being heard by our community. And so what we wanted to do is to say, well, it's about time now that we started to hear the case studies, started to hear the stories about what is happening. And so hence the webinar series, Lunch and Learn. And so we're intending to run these on a monthly basis. And as I say, there will be about an hour long. And so without further ado, I'd like to very warmly welcome Stephen Hammersley and Phil Wainwright from Pilgrims Friend Society. And we're going to hear from them over the next 45 minutes about what they've been doing. But before we start, perhaps one of you could tell us a little bit about Pilgrims Friend Society.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you might need to speak up, Phil.
Okay, so Pilgrims Friend Society is over 200 years old. It was founded in 1807. And so we've been going for quite a long time. That's over 210 years now. And our main job is to provide care homes for older people. We're a Christian charity, providing care for Christians, and in some of our homes, non-Christians as well. So that's us. Sorry, Stephen's just moved something and we've lost the picture, but hopefully you can still hear us.
No, we can hear you, and actually we've had a comment from one of the participants saying, I can hear this clearly. So
oh, good.
Excellent. And,
okay.
And so thank you, Phil. So a little bit about yourselves and your role at Pilgrims Friend Society.
So Stephen Hammersley here. I'm the Chief Executive, and I've spent the last 15 or so years in the voluntary sector, initially with a charity called Tier Fund, and then latterly with a group of charities called Community Foundations. Prior to that, I used to be in the world of finance. I was involved in marketing and other bits and pieces with Barclays Bank. I think that's me.
And, yeah, lovely. Thank you. And Phil?
Well, I've been here for 25 years, so this is about all I've done really. But I first came running payroll and mainly looking after IT. But I'm sort of migrated into HR, and in fact did all my HR training while I was employed with Pilgrims Friend Society. So I've been here quite a long time.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much. And so perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what the problem was that you were looking to solve with Everything Disc. You know, how did it come to be that you decided to bring Everything Disc into your organisation? What's the background to that?
Yeah, so we've been investors in people since 1999, and with investors in people, we've always tried to use what comes out of that to inform what we do, rather than just using it to get the badge, so to speak. And in an Invested in People review now about 4 years ago, one thing that did come out was that we have very good leaders and managers in our care homes and around the society, but people couldn't really say what a leader or manager should look like in Pilgrims Friend Society. We didn't have a very clear definition. And so it was felt that we should do that. We should put together a competency framework which actually would mean that people would know what a leader and manager looks like. That's good for the current managers, for their development going forward. Also for when we're recruiting managers, we can very clearly say what we're looking for. And also, of course, for people who are aspiring to be managers or leaders within the organisation, they know what they need to do in order to do that. So that was really what sort of motivated it to start with.
Yeah. I mean, what were the, you said a little bit about what that was going to give you, but what were the effects of managers not really being clear about what their role was?
So I think that was mainly inconsistency, and also people, perhaps staff, not knowing what they can expect from their manager, and managers not knowing what staff should expect from them. So it was, it did make things difficult. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Stephen.
No, I'm going to just go back one stage further slightly. I think the other thing we got from DISC, actually, and it relates also to not being clear, but also it gave us a common language to talk about leadership with our managers, and I guess it gave our managers therefore a common language to talk to us also, those of us who are about supporting them in the development of their leadership capabilities. It gave us a common language to talk to them about. So I suppose the lack of one of the problems was a lack of a common language, and this gave us a common language to help us together explore what good leadership looks like in the society.
Yeah, fabulous. So going back historically, then you had this Investors in People report, and it was saying that managers weren't really clear about what their role was, and as you say, there were all kinds of consequences of that. And so this is a little bit interesting, isn't it? Because obviously I was part of you using DISC in the organisation, but I'm going to be asking you questions as if I wasn't, but I am coming clean and saying I was. So from your memory, what was the process that you went through once you decided, we now need to have clarity about and be able to be clear with our managers and leaders about what their role is? What was the process that you can remember that we went through, or you went through?
The first thing was that we wanted the managers and leaders to be part of the process. So it wasn't just going to be a sort of some kind of top-down thing that we imposed some new framework on them. And so the very first thing we did at one of our managers' conferences was to brainstorm, if you like, and say to them, well, what do you think a leader ought to look like within Pilgrims Friend Society? We do have quite a strong Christian ethos, and we knew that the managers would be quite keen for that to be very much part of any definition that we came up with. So that was the first thing, really. And of course, as a caring organisation, that also has to have a strong place in it as well. And that was very good, and they came up with quite a lot of things that were very useful. We then looked at an NHS leadership framework, and that's partly because we wanted to, we're obviously regulated by Care Quality Commission, CQC. They're very keen on organisations being what they call well-led. And so we wanted something that they would really recognise as being, proving that we're well-led. So we used that framework as well. We then tasked somebody called Julie French with helping us to put all that together. And I think Julie got us some of the senior managers in the organisation together for a 2-day workshop where first of all, we learnt about DISC, which was completely new to us. And then we spent some time together putting together from those various elements what we felt should be in the framework. And I think, Julie, you went home loaded down with some flip chart sheets, didn't you, that we'd written on throughout the day. And Julie then sort of kindly drew all that together into a draft framework.
Yeah.
That was quite a task, I think.
It certainly was quite a task. So if I can just take you back to that those 2 days that we had in London together with yourselves and with the management team, coming up with that competency framework, or at least coming up with a lot of things on flip charts. Can you remember the profile that we used to bring that together? Can you remember how we did that?
We used the work of leaders profile in the DISC range, and if I remember rightly, I think we all did our individual profiles first, didn't we?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You did. So just for the people, because obviously there are going to be some people, a lot of people who are listening to this either now or as part of the recording, who know what the work of leaders is all about. But there are going to be some people who are quite new to everything DISC. And so would it be okay if I just give a little overview
of course, yes,
of that work of leaders?
Going to ask me to do that, which I might have struggled to do just off the cuff, so I'm glad you're going to do it.
Well, actually, okay, so so the work of leaders is a profile that can help leaders to assess themselves in terms of the competencies of a really good leader. And the work of leaders model is about the process of leadership, and it describes that in terms of three things, if you remember: vision, creating a vision, gaining alignment to the vision, and then championing execution. And I think you preferred, Stephen, the phrase embedding the vision, didn't you? I remember that you said, I prefer embedding the vision to championing execution. Sounded a little bit fine, all that. So we had vision, alignment, execution. And so you're absolutely right. All of the managers completed their work of leaders profiles beforehand so that you could have clarity about the model and what it meant for you, and also what your strengths and your development areas were as a leadership team. So if you remember, we also did the group report to pull all that information together about how you're doing as a management team. And so we did that, as I remember, in the morning, and then we started looking at those areas, vision, alignment and execution, as well as the framework from the NHS. And we pulled together with all of the managers, I mean, you did the work really, what you thought that meant for managers in Pilgrims Friend Association, in other words, society. In other words, what were the competencies that you thought were essential for your managers? And so that was where all the flip charts came in. And as you say, I took all those, I laid them down, I took all those back home, and then drafted that into, well, a first draft competency framework. And then I sent that over to you, and there were a few tweaks here and there, but I think that really did form the foundation in best part of the competency framework that you've got.
Yes. It hasn't changed a great deal since what you wrote. I mean, we have tweaked it, and we've tweaked the format, but you know, the vast majority of it is what you put together for us. So
maybe just a word of explanation as to why we went with DISC, or everything DISC. And I think I've already indicated one, and that was we wanted to buy into something, a tool that would give us a common language. And one of the attractions of DISC was that we could do it as a leadership team, or the senior part of the leadership team rather, but then we could also provide it as a tool to those of the senior part of the leadership team who are working day in, day out to develop the people who are running our homes. So we've got 13 residential care homes effectively, and the people who run those homes are quite remote from us. We don't see them physically that often, so we wanted to make the most of the interactions we have around developing them as leadership. So that's the first thing. It gave us a tool and a language. The bit about the NHS comes from the fact, and also, sorry, just before I get onto that, we also wanted to buy in something that gave us a bit of a head start. So we didn't want to start having to define leadership, you know, ourselves. We wanted a bit of a head start, which is what DISC gave us. But then we wanted to customise it, if you like, to our specific world. And the relevance of the NHS, I think Phil did mention it, was just to stress the point is we need to show to the regulator that our homes are well led. So what we didn't want to have was a leadership model that the regulator would look at askance when they came into any one of our homes. So for us, the beauty of the work we did on a competency framework was we had one that followed a generically good leadership model, but also specifically addressed those aspects of leadership that we knew our regulator would be looking for if and when the inspector called to look at how we were leading either individual homes or the charity as a whole. So that's where it all came together, and DISC was useful in terms of giving us a head start and giving us a language and a tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that point, have you had feedback? Have you actually presented it anywhere where, you know, to regulators, for example, where you've had feedback?
So we haven't made a formal presentation, but we need to perhaps a little bit later in this conversation, I'm sure we'll come on to, well, actually, what did we do in practice then, beyond the competency framework and getting people to do some psychometric tests, which are the kind of things that feed into the DISC tool. But what we have done is we've done some things practically in the homes so that they have got some, so for example, a plan. Each of the homes has got a little plan now that follows the leadership framework, the DISC leadership framework. And what that's enabled our managers to do is to share that with the regulator when they come in. So they actually have got a plan for the development of their home, which they, as a leader of their home, have facilitated with their colleagues. And certainly we know that has been shared with individual regulators when they come in to inspect a home. And that's led to a conversation about leadership that they wouldn't have had prior to that, when the first series of questions and conversation would probably been around medicines or safeguarding or whatever the other sort of more nitty-gritty issue might have been.
Yeah, fabulous, thank you. And just before we move on, we've been talking about this management and leadership competency framework. If somebody who's listening wanted to have a look at what was developed, would you be willing to share that with others?
Yes, I think that would be fine. Yeah, we tend to borrow with pride, so I'm sure we can help others as well.
Led with humility.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So anybody listening to this, either as part of the recording or today, who would like to have a copy of that, just let me know, because I'm pretty certain I have got the latest version of that. I can make sure that that you receive that. Thank you ever so much for your generosity there. So we worked on that. A management and leadership competency framework document was created. What was the next step?
So we had to then bring it back to our management team and to sort of say this is what we've now drafted, and we still wanted it to be consultative, so we wanted them to see that, and I think by and large it was well received. I think what we kind of realised was that probably one area where we knew they would probably all struggle would be in the crafting a vision area, because that's something that I think is quite new. When you're running a care home, it's a very practical job. There's a lot, there's a lot of day-to-day stuff that needs to be done, and even if you're the manager of the home, you do have to get involved with the nitty-gritty. So they're probably quite good at execution and not too bad at building alignment, because they're used to sort of interacting with their staff. But vision was something quite new, and so almost at the same time as we introduced that, we said to them, look, don't panic when you see the vision section. We know you're probably not that practiced at this, and something we did in the management meeting that we introduced that was to sort of to go through a program of helping them to sort of think about how they could build a vision for their own scheme, their own either care home or housing scheme. And so we actually did that as a group, with Stephen giving some ideas and asking sort of questions that would help them to do that. And I think what's been really exciting about that, and I think it's what Stephen's probably going to mention, is that as a result of doing this, all of our managers have actually built a local vision for their homes, and within the overall vision for the organisation. And I think that's something that possibly we might not have done had we not been going through this process, because it actually has helped us to think about those 3 stages of being a leader.
Yeah.
And so that's been exciting. So they went away from our meeting, you know, with a sort of a start, a draft, if you like, of their local vision, and then went away and actually thought about it in more detail. Most of them, I think, along with their staff as well, and have come back to us. And as Stephen said, each one of them now does actually have their own sort of local vision document, and so that's really, really exciting. Yeah,
fantastic.
I think,
go on, Stephen.
And to preserve some kind of alignment with that, 2 years previously, so before we'd even thought of doing this work with you, Julie, and with DISC, and specifically on leadership, when I was relatively new here, we have our managers together once a year for a senior team meeting. We call it mini conference, I suppose. And what we did then was we did a whole series of creative sort of workshops with managers to try and get a sense of what the charity's overall vision might be, what might it comprise, what might its elements be. So when we came together again last autumn, we already had a vision for the charity that we had developed consultatively with the senior leaders, if you like. So what we then actually did, we go the one stage further that Phil's just talked about. We said, well, what does that vision look like for your home? So that's what preserved some degree of coherence across our 13, as I've already said, quite remote sites. And then we link that very much into, you know, the obviously very directly create a vision with your colleagues, build alignment for its delivery and champion execution. So, and that was the thinking that then went into a little plan template that they filled in. Whereas previously, I thought I would say probably the managers were preoccupied with the, you know, keeping their home going, because it's a full-on job to run a residential care home, which is what we've got. And what we're trying therefore do is to sort of help them become leaders by providing them with a simple sort of planning framework that they could complete for their home, if that helps.
Yeah, it definitely does. And how did they feel about creating the vision? You know, because as you say, Phil, that was very new for most of them. You know, probably didn't even see it within their job description. And now they're being asked to craft a vision, you know, with their staff. How did they receive that? How did they feel about it?
I think had we just sort of, as I say, I think if we just sort of put it down in writing and said, look, now this is part of your job, I think there would have been some slight kind of panic, I think, as to, you know, well, what does that mean and how do I do that? But I think because we did it alongside, you know, they knew that in that conference where we were introducing the framework, that there were also going to be sessions on how to create a vision for your local home. So I think they were comforted that they were going to get that support and help. And so I think it actually went very well, and I don't think there was that sense of panic in them. And I think, you know, I think they took to it very well. As I say, we were very encouraged how, you know, the vast majority of them were very enthused about that and about doing it. And, you know, the visions were very wide-ranging, you know, from I need another hoist, as it were, to I want to buy the closed-down doctor's surgery across the road, you know, so I can extend the facilities that we give. So, you know, the visions were very wide-ranging, and we've helped them to sort of tweak them and perhaps think more widely, you know, in some cases, and so on. And in some cases a little more narrowly, maybe, where it's been a little bit sort of too much for us. But no, I think, you know, by and large, the process has gone really, really well.
Yeah, lovely. And I imagine that they've learnt from each other in terms of what the kind of the right way of doing that. Because remember, in the model, we are talking about creating a vision, you know, the exploration stage, but then the second one being about boldness, about thinking big before we then narrow it down to test assumptions and to be a bit more realistic. Yeah, fantastic. So that's the vision part. And then, if I remember rightly, you then invited me to come and do a one-day certification training with yourself and the other managers. So do you want to talk a little bit about what the rationale behind that was?
So clearly we wanted DISC to be something that we could use and embed, to use the terminology, in everything that we did, in the review process, appraisals and so on. And clearly that made sense to have our senior team trained in doing that. And that has been very helpful indeed, as we'll probably talk about in a moment. But yes, so it was so that we could use DISC going forward. We could use it ourselves. We could get new people coming on board to actually do their DISC profile, and that the operations team could analyse those and go through it with the individuals and draw out from it, you know, things that are good, things that need development, and so on and so forth. And that has certainly proved to be the case. So it's been very useful to have that.
Fabulous. So I know, Phil, that after that session, you ran a session, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Yeah. So do you want to say a little bit about the session that you ran?
Yes. So we at one of our mini sort of managers meetings, we sort of fully introduced DISC to everybody, and yes, I walked the model. So yes. Very much helped, I have to say, by Julie's lovely videos on her website, which really do go through it point by point. Because although I'd done the training, by the time I actually got around to doing it, it was like, now which order do I supposed to do it in? So it was great to see. It was great to see you. I think it's Tony, isn't it?
Yes. Well, Tony's sort of off camera, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Yes, he's the you know, he's the one sort of doing it. But it was really helpful, and that helped me to sort of do it in the right order. To get everything orientated correctly. And I looked at how much the DISC mats cost, and I thought, I can do better than that. I can make one. So my assistant and I spent a happy afternoon sticking together millions of pieces of A3 paper to produce a DISC mat, which we still use. So it's the best of time. And it went very well. I said to all the managers, it's the first time I've done this, so if I look like I'm a bit nervous or I haven't done it before, but it went very well, and they really understood it and really got it, and that was very good. Yeah, and then of course we followed that through with each one of them doing their own profiles, and we'll talk about that in a minute, what we did further on.
Yeah, great stuff. Great. So just before we move on to look at, you know, what the next steps were. For anybody listening who's thinking, oh, well, what are these videos? You will have, if you are a member, if you've done the certification training or you've got an Epic account, then I will have sent you a link to the page that Phil's talking about, and on there you'll find the videos of me sort of demonstrating how to walk people around the model. So there are 8 videos on there, and those are the ones that, Phil, you're referring to, that you found useful. And I know many people have found those great as a reminder about, you know, how do we do it again? And as you say, in what order to run an interactive session teaching.
And I think that order is quite important, because it does introduce it to people bit by bit, and it's a sort of logical flow through, and then by the time you get to the end of it, people understand where you're coming from and how you've got to that. So, you know, they know it's just not some sort of management mumbo jumbo, that it really does have, you know, it really does have a point and a purpose. So it is very useful indeed.
Yeah, fabulous. And we always do that before we give the profiles out, so that people get a nice overview of the model. Yeah. Wonderful. So you had that DISC certification day, you then ran a session yourself. So what was the next part of the process?
So we went on to what we wanted to do then was to use that for all the managers to for them all to do their own DISC profiles. So we sent out the invitations to all of them to do that, and they all very quickly did those. And then we downloaded the profiles and distributed those to the relevant operations managers who line manage the home managers, who then went through a process of reviewing that with their individual managers as part of their appraisal process. Perhaps just to talk about that for a moment, because one thing that we have done, and we've been very keen throughout this process to actually use the framework, the competency framework that we have developed, and the vision alignment execution model. We've been very keen to sort of use that in everything that we're doing. And so we've also lined up our appraisal process for leaders to that model as well. So we completely redesigned our appraisal form and process so that it actually, you know, it references our own competency framework, which is lined up to the vision alignment execution model. And in fact, after the first round of appraisals, we took feedback from everybody as to how well it worked and what they found good and what they found confusing. And we've tweaked it a little bit more so that it is properly aligned, and that seems to be going very well.
Great.
So they all did those appraisals using that new way of doing it. And by and large, I think, as I say, apart from a few bits of confusion here and there, I think because of the way we designed the form at first, you know, people could see how well that tied in. And in fact, we had a meeting with the managers last week just showing them how we've tweaked it, and they all seemed to think that was really great. So I think that'll work well in the future.
Fabulous. And again, is that form a form that you'd be willing to share, that appraisal form that's aligned to the sort of vision alignment execution?
Yeah, definitely, because yeah, it does line up to that very much. And one thing that we have done is in the personal development plan that we have for the managers, we have two sections. And the first section is actually taken from their DISC profile. So it's their leadership challenges, which you get 3 of from the DISC profile, and that's those are listed in their personal development plan, and then they sort of determine with their manager how they're going to address those and what they feel they need to do going forward.
Yeah.
And then there's a section which is more sort of general personal development targets, which they may identify themselves.
Yeah.
So we have quite a lot.
Yeah, fabulous. I've got some questions coming through here, Phil and Stephen. So is it okay if we sort of just break off slightly, because I think they're obviously relevant to what we've just talked about there. So here's a question from Sue Petrie, who says, did managers do DISC or work of leaders profile? Which profile did the managers do?
Yeah, we actually wondered which one was the best to do, because there is a manager's profile as well, isn't there, and there's a workplace profile. And I think we determined that because, you know, the thing we're really trying to do is to, I suppose, up the game of our leaders and for them to think of themselves as leaders rather than just managers. And you probably realise I'm using the terms a little interchangeably. Old habits die hard, but and so we felt that the work of leaders profile was the most appropriate one to give them that sort of big picture view of themselves, really. So that's the one that we used.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. So it was the work of leaders to reinforce that that they are leaders, and that's what you're looking to develop them into.
Yeah.
So we've got a message here from Kath Walsh, who says that she's interested in the order of explaining the model before they did their own profiles. How did this work? So that you took them through the model, and then you gave them their profiles, which is the way that we recommend, actually, Kath. But how did you find that worked?
I think it worked well, because I think that because when they walk around the model, they obviously put themselves in whichever sort of box, you know, they end up in, kind of thing, whether it's the D, I, S or C. And then I think that and sometimes they get a bit of a surprise when they get their profile back. They're not quite where they put themselves. That happened to me actually twice. But I think they understand where it's coming from, and I think that's the important thing. I think if they just do the profile, just do the assessment and then get their profile, it's in a bit of a vacuum. There's no explanation as to how you get there or why you're in that particular area. And so I think they understand because they've seen all the words associated with their particular section. Then I think they understand it. So I would recommend it. Having actually done it, I would definitely recommend it as a way of doing it.
Yeah. And as you say, Phil, it's really important to sort of pre-frame that they might not be standing in the place where they ultimately are with their profile, and that's okay. There's reasons why that is. Sometimes they're thinking about themselves in a different way or in a different role or different context, and that can make that difference. And remember, you know, when people are walking around the model, they're only answering 2 questions. And so the profile is going to be a much more sophisticated representation of their style.
And that's right. And I think, you know, we do try to say to them when they're doing their profile to think of themselves in their leadership situation, not necessarily in their personal situation or whatever. And I think the other thing we found is with one or two people, we, you know, I certainly an operations manager looked at one of the manager's profiles and said, oh, but she doesn't do that, you know, and clearly that was perhaps her natural style, but she's obviously learned to flex that style already and to overcome that. So, and we felt that very much with that person, that she had already learned to overcome that, perhaps that natural tendency that she had. So that was, you know, that's quite interesting as well. And obviously it's important to allow people to see that, you know, if they say, well, you know, I'm sure I sort of deal with that, you know, say, well, yes, you may well be doing, and we can see that you do deal with that, but that's your natural tendency maybe.
Yeah. And as you say, it's lovely to have get those conversations going and for people to get feedback from each other about how they present and how that might be different from their own sort of self-perception. So really useful. Okay, so then moving on, you've done the appraisals. Yes. And you've identified what the development areas are, etc. What was the next step?
So there were two other sort of things that we wanted to do really. One was we had a desire to understand what each individual leader sort of needed in terms of personal development from that, but also we wanted to see if we could identify if there were any themes sort of organisation-wide sort of development, whether there's anything that we needed to do for everybody as an organisation. And that's a process. That part of the process we're still going through at the moment. We haven't quite got there yet on that one. And the other piece of work that we wanted to do was to, because we're sort of trying to align everything really to what we're doing, is to look at the job descriptions and person specifications that we have, and to make sure that they align as well. Because clearly, if you want this to inform people that you're going to recruit or people who are going to move into management, then when they look at a job description, it needs to match the framework that we've drafted. And so again, we are still in the process of doing that at the moment. So but hopefully once this is finished, we'll have a set of documents and practices that all align to the same thing.
Yeah, fabulous. So is there anything else that in terms of the process that you've either been through or are intending to go through that you'd like to share? Is there anything else sort of coming up in terms of how you've integrated everything DISC into the organisation?
I
can't think of anything off the top of my head.
So I think the only other thing to note is I do think that, Phil and I were just talking this morning, I do think that it's, there's a degree of enthusiasm for leadership that we didn't have before, partly because we've defined it, partly because we've got some tools, and partly because we've done some things. And we've talked to our people who perhaps predominantly might have thought themselves as manager. We've talked to them as a leader, and we've included them in a process. And they quite like, I think, being regarded in that way. So, there are just the first signs that we are going to get quite a lot of ideas coming forward now as to how we can support people to become more effective leaders in our organisation. So in a year's time, it might be the case that we're talking about how we've had to try and not dampen down, but just make sure that all of the ideas that are coming forward, kind of we can bring them together as part of a coherent programme to develop people, as opposed to a series of ad hoc initiatives. But that's probably the only thing I could probably add at this point.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Excellent. So from your starting place from that Investors in People report about, you know, leaders, managers not really being clear about their role to where you are now, what would you say in terms of what your initial outcomes were for this whole piece of work, this whole project, and what would you say about it?
I think it's been pretty well aligned to what we were hoping for, and that's been a bit of a surprise to me, really. You know, because sometimes these things do either migrate or go off track and things like that. But we had quite a clear set of objectives when we started, and I think we've certainly tried to always refer back to those. And in fact, when we met with managers last Monday, and gave them an update on where we were, it was quite interesting to go back to the sort of PowerPoint from the previous presentation about what we were aiming for, and to actually be able to sort of say, yeah, actually we've done that, that's still in progress, but it's still part of the aim, and that's still in progress, but it's still part of what we want to do. And in fact, we've added appraisal as well, which wasn't in the original process. It's been very pleasing to me that although in one way it seems to have taken quite a long time, it's been quite steady progress, and sustainable progress as well. And I think, I think because partly the length of time the process has taken, I think has actually been a help, because people have got used to the idea as we've gone along. So yeah, I've been quite pleased with what we set out to do is actually what has happened and where we've got to.
And I guess the model, the vision, alignment, execution, embedding model has helped with that, hasn't it? Because it's kept reinforcing the message. This is your job. This is what your role is all about.
Yeah.
I was just about to chip in. I think one of the only things we didn't mention was that so two things actually. One is that our overall plan for the charity set out that an important aspect of that was that a direction of travel for the way that we work is to delegate more to our home managers and to make to increase their influence in what we do. So that was before we ever got to the project. And then Phil did write this up more formally as a project, the leadership project. So it did mean, I'm afraid, a moment of confession here, I can't actually remember what they are precisely, but we did set out our objectives as to what we wanted to achieve, and we've been able to check as we've gone through the process the extent to which we've achieved them. And the we there is the whole senior team, not just Phil and I or our director colleagues. So I think that's been a very helpful, possibly essential part of what we've done.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
I'm sure. There's a couple of questions here, if I can jump in now with them. So there's one from somebody called Tony Burgess. Tony's asking, how well has DISC become a common language for individuals in the organisation in their day-to-day interactions?
Well, so I don't actually know the answer to that in terms of what actually goes on within our homes. What I do know is we as a senior team, we have a support team, the head office, if you like, we try not to call it that. Certainly we use that language in our conversations with our managers. And I think we've used it enough so that they're all used to using it back to us. What we do know is they've all done an exercise where they will have talked about creating a vision and build, whether they've actually used that language with their staff in their homes, I don't know. But I don't know.
No, I don't either.
No, so we don't know in terms of in the homes. We might as well be honest.
Certainly the leadership team, I would say, are very used to that language now, and it's not something that when you speak in those terms, they look at you puzzled. They know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. And I think probably, and probably quite rightly, they probably don't necessarily use the language with their staff on the ground, but they're certainly doing it, and I think that's the important thing. And as I say, particularly, I think building the vision, which I think, as far as I know, most of them have done with their teams, has been something that they've certainly sort of taken on board. But yeah, they're actually using that language with everybody, I'm not quite sure, but certainly within the management team, we are very much using it.
Yeah, I suspect in the homes, not much, I would imagine.
Yeah.
The reality of the interactions, but I think most, I'm guessing, but because we haven't actually asked, but I would suspect that most members of our teams, most of our colleagues, would be aware that their home has a vision, and there's been a process in place in their vision to contribute to it. So, but no, I think if we thought that the managers are going around talking about creating vision, champion execution, and building a line with champion execution, we might be kidding ourselves a bit.
I think I'm going to do a bit of mind reading here, but I think the question might have been more about using DISC as a common language rather than the vision, alignment, execution. In other words, when we talk about that, we talk about it in terms of people being able to identify behaviours in DISC terms. And there's a lot of benefits to that, because it means that it's less personal and more reminding people this is about behavioural preferences and tendencies. So often where organisations have integrated it, it would be more, I think you're being a bit, I think you're being a bit too much D here, or I think we need more C in this conversation. You know, that kind of a very simple way of bringing it in.
I mean, it does come through sometimes, you know, somewhere just sort of being very detailed. It's like, oh, that's your C style coming out and things like that. We certainly get those kind of conversations coming up. Yeah. Lovely. Yeah. And that might be something further on down the line to, you know, to be checking in with the managers about, because there's probably room to expand even more on the tool that you've got within the home, so that people are really benefiting from it in terms of the everyday relationships. I mean, we have used some comparison reports, you know, to help in circumstances where there are, you know, there've been perhaps some difficulties in a relationship or some challenges. And we've certainly used a few comparison reports to assist with that, and that's been very useful. So certainly people are used to that as an idea of something that can be done. Yeah, fabulous. Okay, so I've got some more questions here. This one is a question for Stephen from Michaela, and it is, if you would quantify the benefits you've enjoyed in measurable terms, what would they be?
So first of all, we haven't. There's an if. Okay, so if we haven't, if we had, we would expect to have seen the purpose of doing this was to unlock the potential of our managers to lead their homes. And I think what goes on in our homes day in, day out is very good, actually, at present. And I think what we were looking for, looking for our managers to think of things they could do to improve, though, what they do, and to lead that change. And I think in business terms, if that's what the question is getting at, I think we're looking for, in fact, I don't think, I know what I was looking for. I was looking for increased occupancy, because our homes are better places, our managers are better able to talk about what they're doing. And I would have looked for reduced cost as managers started to think about reducing agency usage, which they all know is not conducive to good care, let alone being very expensive. And the other element would be stronger reports from the regulator, who met a manager leading a home and not a manager that's just about surviving day to day. So one might then say more income and reduced costs, reduced agency costs, and reduced, if you like, regulatory costs, because the cost of failing a regulation, failing an inspection is considerable.
Yeah, so those would be the things that you would be measuring, but you haven't.
Well, we do measure those. We do look at those things every month. They're key, if you like, performance indicators for us. But what we didn't do is say, you know, because we're doing the leadership project, we expect occupancy to tick up by, you know, X% of this home, or agency costs to come down by Y%. Yeah. I think the reason we didn't do that is because there's so many factors that influence those two numbers. But you know, that's what we were looking for, direct, if you like, bottom line financial benefits from this, flowing from better care or better, higher quality of care as managers, you know, started to lead their home to achieve better for our residents.
Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps, Michaela, you can, if you've got a follow-up question to that, perhaps you can. Oh, I think you have. So there's a follow-up question, Stephen. And it's, to what extent have they noticed increased change activities and improvement projects in the homes?
Well, we've had a lot of them, haven't we?
Yeah. I think on our it's a good question, hence a pause. I think on our there's a lot of change going on in our world. Regulations are changing all the time. But the market is changing a lot for care, and I think we've probably not seen a significant impact on the change that we initiate, if you like, from the centre, from the head office, the support office. Whether that be rewriting all of our policies or shifting our care records onto a web-based system. Those are or the way we care for people living with dementia. They're all projects that we've initiated in partnership with our managers, but I think they have been unchanged. What we have started to see, though, is we have started to see some locally initiated change projects that I don't think we would have seen had we not embarked upon this programme. Yeah. So one very, very, very encouraging example, we've always said that we've got 3 objectives for one of our homes. One is to take people into care. I'll simplify it 2. The second one is to have an impact in our communities. Now, the impact in our communities, typically, nothing has happened under that heading because we're all too busy, looking after the people that we've got. But as a consequence of this programme, or at least in part of it, last week we heard, in fact, this week actually is happening, the first of our friendship cafes that one of our homes is running in some premises local to its home, in partnership with other charities that are concerned with older people and churches that are concerned with older people. So that's an example of a locally initiated change project pursuant to our objects, our plans, objectives, that I don't think we would have seen. So, long-winded answer, they're getting on with delivering the charity-wide initiatives in the way that they had, I think, but they're adding to that by initiating local things, projects, local change, and that's what I think we were lacking in the way we were running as a charity before we did this initiative.
Yeah, thank you. You had to think on your feet there, and nothing. You did extremely well. Okay,
oh, no.
So I've got a question here. A couple more questions. Sorry.
Probably move that up a bit.
Okay. So a question here from Sam Bagshaw. If you were to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
Well, that's a question you asked me actually when we were talking about it earlier, wasn't it, Julie? And I think my answer then was not a lot, actually. I think it's really worked well. I think at the beginning we just had a bit of difficulty in seeing how DISC tied in with the competency framework that we were trying to build and so on. But I think that kind of became clear as time went on, because DISC, we were very new to DISC. We didn't really know what it was all about. But I think as time has gone on, certainly over the last sort of year and a half or so, we've seen quite clearly how it all ties together, and it does seem very logical. I don't know whether I could have done that differently at the time or not, but I don't think there's a lot. I don't know about you, Stephen, but I don't think there's a lot that we could have done differently. It's worked really well.
So we've been telling our board that we think this is one of the initiatives that we've done well. It's not the case with everything. So just in case the trustee is long gone, we better stop with what Phil's just said, I think.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so we've got, well, just in terms of your answer to Michaela about the improvement projects, etc., she put, thank you, that's what I was looking for. So you certainly answered Michaela's question. So there's a question here from Tony again. Can you see some usefulness in helping staff use DISC to tailor interactions with different clients?
Haven't thought about that one, so possibly, yeah.
That one in the pot? Yeah, I mean, because it certainly could, to have, I mean, even if you were just to run the kind of session that you ran with the managers, if you were to run some of those sessions with the people who are more hands-on, giving them the ability to be flexible with the residents, that could enhance relationships even further. That might be something further on down the line to think.
I think there's a number of things with this that we feel we could explore. Conflict management and things like that, which I think will be very useful, that we haven't explored yet. So it's, I know there's a lot of potential still unexplored for it.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. There's a question here from Sue Petrie. I think she might have just had to leave, but and she did say it was a great session and very useful. But she wanted me to say huge thanks to you both. Her question was, people often see work around culture and leadership as soft skills, and so often ask, how would you demonstrate return on investment? And I think that's where Michaela's questions were coming from, because often people do think, is this really going to make a difference? And and I think, you've kind of answered that by saying, well, you have seen some differences in terms of the innovation, in terms of the projects that you wouldn't have seen before. Yeah.
I think the other thing to mention there is we in a sense are fortunate. Well, yeah, we are fortunate that we've got a very proactive regulator, the Care Quality Commission, and they say that leadership is essential to delivering compliant care. So that's one of the things they look at in every one of our homes. For us, obviously, before you get into a pounds term on, a pound return on investment, you've got to be compliant. That's the order of investment, isn't it? You've got to be compliant, then you can invest to get other returns. So for us, it was a necessary spend in that regard. I'm now just postulating something, but I think in today's world, whether it be, the way social media is moving or the way whatever's going, I think things are so fast-paced and fast-changing. It's almost a necessary competence, isn't it? If you're running an organisation, you need to have people acting as leaders almost at all levels of your organisation. Even going, I mean, we haven't taken it this far, but even right the very way down at, a carer level, our carers are paid not much more than, we wish we could pay them more than just the minimum wage, but there's another discussion about the way the state funds care, adult social care at present, that means it's very difficult to do that. But we're expecting those people to take the initiative. We're not expecting them just to do tasks.
Yeah.
I just think it may be possible to say that leadership, yes, it could be argued as being soft and fluffy, but in a sense, in terms of reducing risk in an organisation nowadays, I think if you haven't got people who've got leadership competences, skills, capabilities, then you are at a significant risk, possibly.
Yeah.
That's just a way of thinking about it. That may not be true.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you about that. And one of the lovely things about the work of leaders as a model is that, that it can be cascaded. It's simple enough for people to get, everybody has that responsibility to think about what the vision is and think about what does that mean for me, either for me personally or for us as a team, for us as a department. And then how do I align people? How do I get people on board with that? And then how do I do what I need to do to make that happen? So thank you for that. So I've got another question here, and it's another one from Michaela, and she says, if there's time for questions, here's another one from me. What resistance did you experience? What type of, and from whom? So from whom? So what she's saying is, did you get any resistance from anybody to this particular project? And if so, from whom?
I don't think we really did. I think the only sort of negative feedback we got was when we first produced the competency framework, that some of the managers said it was very complicated and detailed and they couldn't get their head around it. And I think it was then a matter of, we simplified the format a little bit to have a summary of it. And because part of it was, if you get a copy of it, you'll see, but part of it was, there was a whole column about ways you could evidence that. And I think they almost saw that as a tick box exercise, that you would have to evidence every single part to be competent in that area, which was not the intention at all. So we simplified it down to just bullet points, which I think made it a lot more digestible. Yeah. And we made it very clear that the evidencing part was just suggestions as to how it could be evidenced. And I think also we made it very clear that they didn't have to be fully competent in every area right from day one, that we recognise that all of us, would have areas where we wouldn't meet those competencies yet, and that it's very much a progressive thing. And we've tried to make that clear as well in the appraisal sort of process, that it's actually getting a lower mark, as you might call it, in some areas is absolutely fine, because it just means that that area is not developed yet, and it's something to be working towards. And I think that's sort of helped them to be more comfortable about it.
A very quick thought from me.
Yeah, just 1 minute. We've got just 1 minute left.
So very quick.
Totally saying that. Yeah.
I think we wasn't resistant to so. Some of the managers found being a leader quite difficult in their homes.
Yeah.
And I think we might have put in place in a more structured way, sort of peer group support groups, over the telephone or whatever within the home, so they could share some of their nervousness about doing things.
Yeah, that is a really, really important point, actually, a great learning, to put some mechanisms in place to have people support each other. Great stuff. So yes, we've got some comments here saying, yes, we'd like a copy of the framework, and a massive thank you. And so a lot of people saying a huge thank you to you both for sharing, because it's been hugely helpful. And there's a lot that people can take away from that. So thank you so much for giving up your time. Just to let people know that there will be a recording of this, so we'll make that available. Those of you who are in organisations where other people couldn't come, then please do flag up to them. They can get a copy of the recording. But yeah, lots of people saying thank you to you. So I hope you're feeling the love, because people are very much appreciative of you sharing openly, so generously, your knowledge and your experience. So thank you so much.
It's a privilege to be here, Julie. Thank you.
And to everybody who's joined, thank you so much for joining. As I say, there will be a recording available to you. I'll let you know about that. And also to let you know that we will be running the next one of these in May. And I'll be interviewing Alex Taylor from Harrison Catering Company about how they have rolled it out. So you might be interested in joining as participants and hearing about how other people are using Everything Disc in their organisations. So thank you ever so much. And I'm going to end the meeting now. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll get the information, the competency framework, etc., out to you, courtesy of Phil and Stephen. Thank you ever so much.